One night, in a town about 70 miles from London, a beautiful young woman was found on the street. She was taken to a workhouse, but she died giving birth to a boy. No one knew who his mother was, so her son was given the name Oliver Twist. At first, Oliver had a foster mother. She was given money to feed him, but she kept most of it for herself. When Oliver was 9 years old, he was sent back to the workhouse to learn to do a job. Life was very hard, and the children there were always hungry. The only food they were given was porridge. One evening, Oliver finished his porridge, but he was still very hungry. So he picked up his bowl and went to the master of the workhouse. "Please, sir, may I have some more?" he asked. "More?" asked the master. He was furious. He immediately took Oliver away and locked him in a small room. Oliver was alone in the room for 3 weeks. When he was finally allowed out, he escaped from the workhouse and ran away to London. A week later, a young boy found Oliver sitting on some steps. Oliver was shaking with cold, and he was very hungry. "Hello," said the boy. "What are you doing here?" "I've been on the streets for a week, and I haven't eaten or slept," replied Oliver unhappily. "A week?" said the boy. "Don't worry, I'll buy you some food. Do you need somewhere to stay?" Oliver nodded sadly. "Good," said the boy. "I know a nice old man who will look after you. Come with me and you'll be fine. My name's Jack, but people call me the Artful Dodger." "That is not the name of an honest person," thought Oliver. Then the Dodger gave Oliver a piece of bread. Oliver didn't trust the Dodger, but he followed him. He was hungry and tired, and he needed a bed and some hot food. The Dodger and Oliver walked through lots of dark, narrow streets until they came to an old house. There, the Dodger introduced Oliver to Mr. Fagin, who was an old man with a thin face and lots of red hair. "Come in, my boy," said Fagin. Oliver didn't trust him. But the old man spoke kindly and offered him a bed to sleep in. The next day, Oliver was taken out by the Dodger. He watched with shock as the Dodger walked into a shop, stole a handkerchief from an old man's pocket, and then ran away. Oliver turned to run away too, but a policeman came and hit him so hard that he fell. The policeman took Oliver to the police station. He didn't know it, but the old man who owned the handkerchief, Mr. Brownlow, was following them. "A different boy stole my handkerchief," Mr. Brownlow said. "Also, I think this boy is ill." At that moment, Oliver fell to the ground, so the policeman carried him outside and left him on the street. Mr. Brownlow took Oliver home with him. When the boy woke up, he was in a soft bed in a nice room. Mr. Brownlow and Mrs. Bedwin, his servant, were there. "How are you, child?" asked Mr. Brownlow. Oliver saw that Mr. Brownlow was looking at a picture of a young woman which hung on the wall above Oliver's head. Then he said, "Look, Mrs. Bedwin, Their faces are the same." Fagin was angry with the Dodger for losing Oliver. He was worried that Oliver would tell the police about his gang, so he shouted to one of them, a pretty girl called Nancy. "Go to the police and find out where Oliver has gone," he said. Nancy was afraid of the police, and she didn't want to go. Then a very large man called Bill Sikes stepped forward. "If you don't do it, I'll hit you," he shouted. Nancy was more frightened of Sikes than the police, so she agreed. When she arrived at the police station, Nancy began to cry. "Oh, my little brother has disappeared," she said. "I must find him." The policeman was a kind man, and he thought Nancy was being honest. "An old man took him away," he said. "He lives in a house in Pentonville, in North London." When Fagin heard this news, he immediately sent Nancy back out with the Dodger to Pentonville. "Don't come back without Oliver," he told them. One morning, he left the house to return some books to a shop for the kind old man. Immediately, he felt some arms go around him, and then he heard Nancy shout, "I found my brother!" Suddenly, the Dodger was there too, and Oliver couldn't escape. When Fagin saw Oliver again, he said, "You're looking well, boy," said Fagin. "Oh no," thought Oliver. "Mr. Brownlow will think that I've stolen the books from him. I don't want him to think that." Mr. Brownlow looked everywhere for Oliver. He sent people to search the streets through the day and night. He put a letter in the newspaper which offered money for information, but Oliver could not be found. A few days later, Nancy took Oliver to meet Bill Sikes at his house. Nancy did not want to do this because she cared about the boy, but she had no choice. Bill showed Oliver a gun. "You know what this is, don't you?" he asked. Oliver nodded. "You and I are going out," said Bill. "We're going to rob a house in the countryside, and if you speak to anyone, I'll kill you." Two other men joined Sikes and Oliver, and they travelled to the huge house. Sikes made Oliver enter it first. As soon as he was upstairs, Oliver ran from room to room shouting, "Help!" Suddenly, two men appeared in front of Oliver. They were servants, and one of them held a gun. There was a loud noise, and Oliver felt a terrible pain in his shoulder. Then Sikes was carrying him out of the house. After that, Oliver couldn't remember anything. He woke up alone in a field, with his clothes covered in blood. He stood up and walked slowly along the road. Soon he saw the big house from the night before. A servant at the big house heard a noise outside and opened the door. "That's the boy from last night!" the servant shouted. He pulled Oliver into the house. "Please be quiet, Giles," said a voice. "Don't wake my aunt." Then a young woman walked down the stairs. "Oh, that poor boy," she said. "Please carry him to a bedroom. Be careful with him." The young woman, Rose, asked a doctor to see Oliver. Dr. Losberne told Rose and her aunt that Oliver's arm was broken. "It will get better," he said, "but he must rest for many weeks." Rose, her aunt, and Dr. Losberne were very kind to Oliver, and he slowly got better. Oliver was grateful, but he really wanted to find Mr. Brownlow. When Oliver was better, Dr. Losberne took him to Mr. Brownlow's house in Pentonville, but no one was there. Dr. Losberne went to ask one of the neighbours about Mr. Brownlow. When he returned, he said, "I'm sorry, Oliver, but Mr. Brownlow has gone to the West Indies." Oliver went back to the countryside with Dr. Losberne, but he was very unhappy. However, 3 months later, they went to Mr. Brownlow's house for a second time to find he was back from the West Indies. He and Mrs. Bedwin were very happy to see Oliver, and they threw their arms around the boy. "My dear boy! My dear boy!" Mr. Brownlow repeated. After Oliver finished telling Mr. Brownlow about Fagin's gang, Rose took the old man into another room. "A few days ago, a young girl called Nancy came to see me," she told him. "She was very frightened, but she cared a lot for Oliver. She said that a man called Monks went to see Mr. Fagin. She heard them talking about Oliver." "What did they say?" asked Mr. Brownlow. "Monks said that Oliver was his younger brother," Rose said. "When Monks's father died, his will said that all of his money was now Oliver's. Monks wanted someone to kill Oliver, because then he would get all of the money." Then Rose started to cry because she was frightened for Oliver. "Where can we find this terrible man?" asked Mr. Brownlow. "Nancy said she will be on London Bridge every Sunday night at midnight," Rose replied. "She can tell us where to find him." Mr. Brownlow was very shocked by Rose's story. "This is very strange," he said. "Nancy must love Oliver very much, because Fagin's gang will kill her if they learn about this." Nancy wasn't on the bridge the first Sunday night, because Sykes hit her as she tried to leave the house. Fagin saw her try to leave and became suspicious. Why did she want to go out? The next Sunday, he sent one of his gang to follow her. Fagin's boy watched as Nancy met Rose and Mr. Brownlow on the bridge at midnight. Nancy was telling them about Monks and the public houses that he visited. "You'll know him because he has a red mark on his neck," she said. "A red mark?" replied Mr. Brownlow. He looked very worried. "I know him. We must find him before he finds Oliver." Mr. Brownlow immediately sent men to look for Monks. They went to all the public houses that Nancy spoke about, and finally they found him in one of them. They put Monks in a carriage and quickly took him to Mr. Brownlow's house. "Go outside and lock the door," Mr. Brownlow said to the servants. Then he and Monks were alone. "It was you," Mr. Brownlow said sadly. "Your name is really Edward Leaford. You're my best friend's son. Your parents divorced, and your father married another woman. She died giving birth to your brother, Oliver." "That's a lie!" shouted Monks. "No, it isn't," said Mr. Brownlow. "Fortunately, as soon as I saw Oliver, I knew that he was my friend's son. He looks just like his mother. Her picture hangs in this house. When the boy disappeared, I decided to look for you. I found out that you went to the West Indies, and I followed you there. But then you came back. You were a terrible child," Mr. Brownlow continued. "And now you're a terrible man. You want to kill that boy so that you can have the money your father left to Oliver in his will. But that's not going to happen. You must sign this paper so that Oliver can have his money, or I will tell the police about you and Fagin." When he heard this, Monks put his head in his hands. "If you do that, they will arrest me and send me to prison," he cried. "Give me the paper. I'll sign it now, and Oliver shall have his money." When Fagin heard about Nancy's meeting with Mr. Brownlow, he was furious. He sent Bill Sikes to kill her. But Sikes couldn't find Nancy. She never came back from the meeting on the bridge. Then, the police arrested Fagin and Sikes. They went to court, and both men were sent to prison. Mr. Brownlow became Oliver's foster father. They lived together in the countryside with Mr. Brownlow's servant, Mrs. Bedwin. Oliver loved the green fields and the flowers and the trees. He also had his father's money now, and his future suddenly looked very good. For the first time in his life, Oliver was completely happy.